Hello, folks. You can see that I'm decided to stand up today. Now you can see that I actually don't wear pants. That's not very appropriate, but I got shorts on. You can't see anyway. So, Kenny Uncut, my latest installment for my new Spaghetti Boost video opinion piece. Ranting opinion piece. Today's episode is about artists, emerging artists. And I kind of realized what I'm doing is like a podcast with one person without a guest. Maybe one day I'll have guests here and there. But for now, I still got enough shit to keep talking about and a cup of coffee, which is pretty much all I need. I won't say it's my first coffee. I better move up closer to the screen before you get more than you want to see. So, artists. I'll never forget in the early 90s, people talk about recession. You never hear enough these days. I've written about it. About how we're in a tremendous, hope this is recording, about we're in a horrible economic crunch, downturn, super recession for art galleries. Galleries are suffering. Galleries are not just constricting, they're evaporating. Mid-level small galleries are suffering at the hands of the behemoths. Is that the right? I never knew how to pronounce that word, behemoth. It doesn't matter. Mid-level to small galleries are always suffering at the hands of the latest economic crisis or from the large monolithic super galleries like Zwirner, Pace, Gagosian, Hauser and Wirth, of course, the hotel gallery. Actually, bear with me. Speaking about art and artists, I made an art piece, Hauser and Wirth Old Age Home. How can I get it without a reflection? A hospice. Boom. They have hotels and restaurants now. That's their solution to the difficult landscape of selling art. Where can I put this stupid thing? So anyway, we've heard a lot in the newspapers about secondary art problems, auction house art problems about everybody except for artists. What about artists? It's never been easy to have a gallery, and it's been even harder over the centuries to be an emerging artist. Picasso was an emerging artist at one point. Van Gogh, Gauguin, Bert Mirabeau, Joan Mitchell, on and on and on. Women artists in particular have had it particularly bad. From a carryover from last week's episode about art fairs, there was a recent article by Magnus Resch about how the big art fairs are making the little galleries suffer. That's just such a bunch of bullshit. There's art fairs for every economic strata of galleries, and no one ever mentions that art fairs actually help artists. Of course, success affirms success in the art world, so it's always the successful artists that are getting the boost, that are getting the help in their careers, as opposed to the ones that really need it. But, artists without a big market have to learn to fend for themselves today more than ever. And that's really the crux of what I want to get into today. But first, a few more asides. I remember during this big recession in 1990-91, which lasted well into the mid-90s, people talk about 2008, 2014, 2023, 24, but 1991 was way worse. There were like tumbleweeds rolling up and down the aisles of auction houses, and galleries were falling by the wayside. I'll never forget, Roberta Smith wrote this amazing article in the New York Times, I think it was 1992, about how 300 galleries went out of business in Soho alone, hundreds and hundreds of galleries. But again, nobody talks about struggling artists and how difficult the plight of an artist is to make a living, to establish a market, to maintain a market over time, and what are the various strategies and possibilities and solutions for the perennial, invariable hardships that constantly affect and have affected artists over the course of history. Again, I think of a book that I just read, the 1901, I think it was published in 1933 by Bertha Weil, who was the first, I also want to continue from last week's episode on art fairs. I mentioned Trudel Bruckner. The reason she gets no credit, not only does she not get credit for having conceived the idea to create the Basel Art Fair in the first instance, but she gets certainly less credit for even being an art dealer and having an early gallery in Basel. It's because she was a woman. And only now have the floodgates been open for women artists and artists of color and from various ethnic, cultural, and orientations to gain a foothold into what is, again, a very difficult, very constrictively shut down, closed system of exclusivity and hierarchy, ridiculous hierarchies. And I always say the art world has its own brand of hypocrisy. Yeah, I was thinking every week I'll do a different background of where I'm going to have these talks. And I was thinking maybe next week I'll do it sitting on the toilet in my bathroom because I'm pissed off. I knew there was a segue to that line of thought, and this is it. Because artists are always getting short shrift. Do you know how hard it is to be an artist if, like me, you can't paint and I can't paint, which makes it even 100 times as hard as emerging artists without great markets that do paint. So the art world, the art market in particular, is the most fickle of markets. The art world in total is around, on average, $65 billion a year, which is an exorbitant, inconceivable sum of money. But relatively speaking, I mean, Apple Computer does that kind of business. By the time I said, hello, this is episode whatever it is, and my one-person podcast without the guest, the art world is very small, and it's a zero-sum game. Economically speaking, a zero-sum game is that one person advances at the direct expense of somebody else. Most recently, that somebody else has been me. And I'm sure it's a lot of you too who are artists that are trying to make a living in this hard scrabble, nearly insurmountably difficult economic landscape that exists for artists, for emerging artists. These are a load of invitations of shows I've done. I was lucky enough to have a museum show at the Francisco Carolinum. I have an exhibition that's up now, in fact, until October 25th. I don't know when this episode is going to air. These are shows I've had at Nagel Draxler, where my show is now, in Long Island with Joel Mester's Old Gallery Rental Gallery, and a show in LA, a show in London, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? I have a lot of art that seems to be piling up in mountains that I haven't been able to sell thus far. That's one of the great dilemmas of art. Art takes up space, a lot of volume, especially if you're someone like Julian Schnabel who paints by the football pitch size. I'm sure he's got a lot of stuff left over in storage. And he's a world famous artist with a decent, not terribly great market, but a market. So my gallery, who I love, and I'm so lucky to work under the auspices of Nagel Draxler and have my second solo show with them now, but they don't have storage for I make sculpture objects, videos, which don't take up space. I made NFTs for 5 minutes when that was a possibility and still do, and they take up less space than a painting, but nobody wants to buy them anymore, unfortunately, especially since I have a tattoo on my arm to that effect. But artists have to store their work, and then the dilemma is, how do you get the gumption to continue making art when you can't get rid of the last bodies of work? What do you do when they pile up? Some artists are resorting to giving it away for free. Give it away, give it away, give it away now. So I remember reading this book recently by Bert Weil. The pronunciation is ridiculously wrong, but forgive me, from Long Island anyway. But it's never been easy for dealers. So she speaks about getting screwed by collectors, getting screwed by other dealers, and getting screwed by artists. And that was in 1901 to early 30s, and nothing has changed on that front. But even she doesn't really give great lip service to the existential dilemma of being an artist today. How do you manage? How do you juggle? And with mounting costs of storage, supplies, fabrication, and the ever-constricting market for art, if, like me, you don't paint and you don't have a really blossoming, developing market, what do you do? How do you countenance? How do you wrestle with the notion of going on and making new work? It's absolutely difficult, and sometimes insurmountable and seemingly impossible. It's impossible. You go online, you use all the various outlets like social media and hustle. You have to hustle, but most importantly, you need a side game. You need something to do. As an artist, I would propose to emerging artists that are frustrated, and I'm frustrated, and it's a constant struggle, and I consider myself to be a successful failure. I mean, I'm a high-profile person who still has to struggle on a daily, weekly, yearly basis. I'm not complaining because I'm lucky enough to do absolutely what I love, and I have a roof over my head because I've been working for 150 years and I'm long in the tooth and old. But the fact is, Roberta Smith's article in the early 90s, the recent spate of articles, seemingly never ending, about how difficult it is for galleries, how hard it is, how many galleries are closing. What about all the fucking artists that are suffering, that are going out of business, that have to change careers, that have to sidetrack the love and passion of their life and take on some crap dead-end job because they have no choice? I know artists that are mid-career that have had museum shows and top gallery representation all over the world. I won't mention the name of someone that comes to mind right now who's a brilliant conceptual artist, and there is one of the keys of this problem. Conceptual art, whether it's early precursors like Vito Acconci and Dennis Oppenheim, and you could just fill in the blank. I mean, Stanley Braun, who is a totally obscure conceptual artist, he had some wonderful little drawings that did phenomenally well at Caspar Koenig's recent charity auction. These things are getting longer and longer as I get longer and longer winded and drink more and more coffee. So please forgive me. Maybe it'll have to be brought into parts. But anyway, no one's ever spoken about artists. Artists are suffering. Artists have to come up with novel approaches to continue to be able to have the resources to pursue the practice of art. Even paint cost a bloody fortune. That's left over from the days when I used to live in England for 15 years. So excuse me. I do never forget the fact of where I'm from, which is the South Shore of Long Island. But anyway, so the question is, I'm lucky enough to have hoarded so much crap art over the course of 35 years in the art world that I've created this series of auctions at Sotheby's called The Hoarder. I've done 5, but I'm running out of junk to sell. So I have to sell bits and pieces of my art collection, make these stupid videos, teach and write, which are breadcrumbs in relationship to what it takes to sustain a family and in art practice today. So everyone is always talking about the galleries, but next time you shed a tear for the local mid-sized to small art gallery, think about the fact that there's a multiple of around 10,000 of the amount of artists that are facing nearly what seems mentally to be something that is insurmountable, that can't be overcome. The hardship of being an artist today, if you don't paint, if you aren't young, if you're not the darling of the art market, the soup du jour, or if your market went up and then it shot down. It's very rare that I've ever seen an artist whose market goes back up after taking a precipitous plummeting dive in the market. So I guess I can't really end on a terribly favorable note, other than saying, hustle, 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 use any means at your disposal. And the problem is that we can't do anything else. Artists make art. It courses through our circulatory system. That is what we do. That is what is in our DNA. That's what we were born to do. So we have to just be industrious and use whatever means are at our disposal to do what we have to do. And art is worth it. Don't stop. I'm going to stop. You'll be happy to know.